Hello, lovely people. Chelsea, the Reading Outlaw, here to do yet another review. I promise this will be my last review video before I get you guys some other content, but I just kind of want to get up to date on where I was at with all the books that I've read and needed to review. So today we are talking about Lagoon by Nnedi Okorafor. Oh my god, you guys, this book. Okay, I went into this book knowing it would be science fiction and set in Nigeria. That's about all that I knew of it. It's so good, you guys. I thought it was so well handled. It's such good science fiction. It does a very good job of kind of blending light science fiction and fantasy, in addition to giving really good insight into some of the politics and gender and religion of Nigeria, because that's where it's set. It takes place in Lagos. And I just thought that it, like, on the one hand, it really reminded me of nothing that I've ever read before. And on the other hand, it reminded me quite a bit of talking to an old professor of mine who was named Ebenezer, who is actually from Nigeria. He was actually from Lagos. And so I was able to, a lot of time in college, I spent a lot of time talking to him, and he was able to fill me in on a lot of the history and society that he grew up in. And this book reminded me very much so of that. So while I can't speak as myself, someone who's African or Nigerian, this book rang true to other stories and experiential stories I've heard from people who have actually been in Nigeria and who have actually lived in Nigeria. That being said, obviously not in the context of alien landing. So let's talk a bit about what this book is about. This book is about three individuals, Adaora, Anthony, and Agwe. I think that's how you say it. I'm pretty Agu, A-G, because it's A-G-U. And so I'm pretty sure it's pronounced Agu. Yeah. And then the alien Ayodele. And essentially what happens is these three individuals, Adaora, Agu, and Anthony, are all in various locations on the beach in Lagos when an alien ship lands in it. They don't know right away that it is an alien ship, but it is, and the aliens make contact. And the first alien to make contact is Ayodele, and she makes contact with Adaora, who is a marine biologist, and basically says that we are aliens, we are not here to harm you, we are here to share your world and to give you technology. And Adaora is cool with that, and she takes, all three of them take Adoyele onto land. And then not America, but Nigeria freaks out. Nigeria flips their shit. They can't quite contend with the idea of there being aliens, so you have different sects of people who are trying to do different things with that information. You have a religious group who's trying to convert the aliens to evangelical Christianity. You have a group of kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Like delinquents, basically, like kind of older teen, young adult delinquents who think that if they can kidnap the alien, they will be able to hold her for ransom or hold her hostage for money. You have the scientific community who just wants to kind of study them and get to know them. And then you have the group of people who doesn't really know what's happening, who are simply Nigerian citizens whose entire world is changing and turning upside down because these aliens have landed. The aliens themselves are super cool. They're kind of like water-based, so they start out as fish. They have this communal nature with all of the beings of the ocean, and they can shapeshift. And the way it's described in the book is like 1,000 metal balls rolling across glass, which doesn't exactly sound like a positive description, but they can shapeshift into anybody and everybody, depending on the person that they need to be seen as for that moment. However, because they can do that, it leads to quite a bit of confusion among everyday citizens as to who is an alien and who's not, which there is definitely some commentary there on alienness and foreignness on the whole, and what we can tell about a person based on what we can see and what we can't see and what we assume. So there's definitely some of that commentary going on here. There's obviously also a lot of commentary on how we as a society react to change in terms of violence. The large portion of the middle of this book, the three characters get separated and they kind of spend the evening making their way back to each other so that they can get this kind of ambassadorial alien to the president of Nigeria, so that they can make that contact with the various leaders that they need to start making contact with. And kind of within that, the large portion of the book, after these three are separated, takes place during riots in Nigeria, because everything has just kind of shut down. People don't know how to cope. People don't know how to process. They don't know what to do. And so there's lots of violence. There's lots of debauchery in the streets. Literally, kind of all hell is breaking loose. And then, at the end of the book, we get to see the dawn of the next day, after the president learns about the aliens and kind of what that means and what happens. And we see a little bit more into the future. But essentially, a lot of this book is just kind of about how we treat literal aliens as well as other aliens in terms of the scope of human reactions and interactions. So that definitely, I think, is the best part of this book, kind of humanizes the science fiction. But I also want to say that I absolutely adore Nnedi Okorafor's writing. This book is interesting in a number of ways because it takes on a number of different perspectives. We never really get inside the head specifically of the aliens, but we do get inside the head of various other like non-human creatures, so animals or stationary objects, and they describe kind of how they are interacting with this new world that has been created because of the aliens. There's this really great part where I think it's a fly. I think it's a fly because it's like a tiny little bug, and they become, because the aliens land and they're in the water when the aliens land, they get kind of this universal knowledge. They are suddenly bestowed upon with all of the secrets of the universe, and then like 3 pages later are hit by a car on a windshield. But it's those kinds of alternating viewpoints and really interesting speaker voices that made this book so much fun to read. I will say as a different part of that, there's a shift about halfway through from a third person to a first person. And then we get several chapters in a first person before switching back to a third person. I didn't dislike that, but it was very jarring when I read it, so much so that I kind of had to reread the first couple of pages after that switch happens. So while I didn't dislike it, I do think that maybe that transition could have been handled a little bit more smoothly. Or at least maybe those first person bits could have kind of been more interspersed, so it just wasn't like such a huge shock, and then kind of chunk of them in the middle, and then everything else being in the third person. I think my other kind of, not qualm, but the other thing I would say about this is it does what am I trying to say? It does a good job of blending the lines between fantasy and science fiction, but I don't necessarily know if that's a good thing. It's alluded, it's because it's done, but it's not done strongly enough. So after the aliens attack, we get kind of these little snippets where the aliens are communicating with other, not historical, mythological figures from like African and Nigerian folktales. So we get a couple portions that's narrated from the Great Spider, who is basically kind of like the weaver of all worlds, and he's talking about how, he's the storyteller. I'm not sure if he's supposed to be Anansi, because the Great Spider talks about Anansi, who is his cousin, so it's not him, but it's the Great Spider, and he is the great storyteller, and he is the one telling us the story. But we also meet like, what are they called? They're like giant float things, and they have a different name, like a name that to me meant something completely different. And of course now I can't find it. But they meet with, the aliens meet with the god of the road. They meet with kind of the party gods and the gods of seduction and the actual like gods and mythological creatures from Nigerian folklore. So that is definitely not a science fiction thing. That is a fantasy thing. And I enjoyed those bits, and it made me hungry and interested to know more about the mythology of places like Nigeria. But it still seemed a little odd in what, other than that, had been a pretty like solid alien science fiction story. So again, maybe just not my particular cup of tea. I didn't dislike it, I just didn't love it. So on the whole, I ended up giving this book 4 stars. I took off a half a star for kind of each of those little problems that I had, the fantasy elements and also the perspective shifts. So those pretty much, I think, wrap up my thoughts on this book. I will say, the way that the aliens defend themselves is very well handled. It's gruesome, but it's very well handled. And so I think if you are looking for a really good science fiction book by an author of color, an author that is non-American or non-British, who's not a member of the EU, then I think that this would definitely be a really good place to start. It's really creative. It's very well written. There's a couple of little hang-ups, but on the whole, I think that this makes a wonderful science fiction read, especially if you're looking for something that's a little bit more light on the actual science part of the science fiction. This is definitely not heavy sci-fi, but I really enjoyed it. So I'm going to stop rambling at you guys and blinding you all with this shiny, shiny cover and say I hope that you enjoy it if you get a chance to pick it up. If you've already read it, definitely let me know down below. As always, you can like, subscribe, and check me out pretty much anywhere else on the internet. Hope you guys are having a good day, and I'll catch you next time. Bye.